Attention sports teams. Let us introduce you to the best fan engagement tool in the game, .vote. By getting a .vote web address for your team, you can allow fans to engage and interact with big-time decisions. In a single click, not only can fans make their opinions heard, but sports teams get a better understanding of their fans' interests. Keep your fans engaged. Simply visit GoDaddy.com today, type in the desired name of your web address, and let the voting begin.
Is Giannis finally set to be traded? Why Drake Maye is not the NFL MVP? And the one sports trial that fans are not focused on but should be. It's all straight ahead on a new edition of Gordon Damer on Sports. Hey, welcome in a fresh edition of Gordon Damer on Sports. Lots to get into on this episode. We'll hit on the Giannis trade talk about the most obvious thing ever, why Drake Maye is not the NFL MVP and people now have to stop talking about it. And we'll dive into the lawsuit involving NASCAR and why, even if you're not a NASCAR fan, you should absolutely care about this trial. But first, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, especially on YouTube, whatever platform you are listening or watching on. It really does help out the podcast, hitting that subscribe button. All right, let's talk a little NBA, because on Wednesday, it was one of those days that only the NBA can create. Only the NBA lives off a disgruntled superstar who wants to be traded. And this time, of course, the center of the universe, again, was Giannis Antetokounmpo. And Shams came out first with his report that Giannis and his representation are engaged in conversations with the Bucks ownership and their front office about his future, both in Milwaukee and beyond. And then, as if that was not enough to get things started, you got Brian Windhorst coming out and saying that a trade request has already been made. Now, whether that's technically true or technically in progress, whether it's formal or informal, the effect of that is the same. It creates this sense that the ground very much is shifting under the Milwaukee Bucks' feet, and the time to move Giannis, which we've talked about, it feels like forever, is now front and center. And Windhorst tied it all into Giannis's interest in the Knicks, as well as the offseason discussions between the Bucks and the Knicks that ultimately did not go anywhere because obviously he is still in Milwaukee. All right, but the minute that you connect the sentences Giannis wants out with might want New York, Knicks fans know what they do. They get very excited. They start running the trade website to see if they can pull off a deal. And all logic and reason kind of goes out the window. And Knicks fans love the enthusiasm, always do. But that's not how trades work. You don't get to keep everything and simply add a former MVP. This is not NBA 2K. So let's slow it down a little bit. Let's be responsible for just a minute and talk through the entire situation from start to finish. What does Giannis want, or at least what we think? What can the Bucks actually do? And what can the Knicks actually do? And when you go through it, I think you're going to see why there's a massive gap between what Knicks fans imagine and what is realistically possible in this situation. Because here's the truth that is not getting said loudly enough, especially not from Knicks fans. This is not simple. And if we're being honest, it's not close to realistic from a Knicks perspective. So we'll walk through everything because there's a lot to get through here between the different particulars, especially when you're talking about a player in this situation. But let's start with Milwaukee and let's begin with the Bucks. What is the actual state of the Bucks franchise right now? Well, they're struggling right now, and Giannis is hurt, which certainly doesn't help. But they're in this uncomfortable territory where the window to win another title there is now shut. That was clear after last year when they got knocked out in the first round for, I think, the third straight year. And I said that on the podcast at the time. They should be proactive this offseason and look to make a move. And they've been trying everything they can to keep Giannis happy and keep the impression that the window was not completely shut. And that was that the organization was simply trying to buy time, trying to maximize the last few years of elite Giannis and trying to push back on the inevitable that the window of opportunity to win another title there is closed. And here's the thing. The NBA tells you the truth, right? Ball don't lie. You can't hide from the roster. You can't hide from the age. You can't hide from the players you have. And Milwaukee has been bumping up against it for a while now. They've tried. I don't think that they've done anything egregious. But Giannis has to be looking at the clock, looking at the organization, looking at the roster around him, and think to himself, all right, I got a title, but is this still the place? Can I still win it all here? And I don't think it's disloyal. I don't think it's being dramatic. The reality of being an all-time great player in the NBA is there is a window and you have to maximize that window. And if you look around and you don't see the path, you have to start asking yourself questions. There is no path to victory for Giannis in Milwaukee. And when you're a great all-time player, especially in the NBA, championships matter. So when people hear Giannis and his camp are having conversations about his future, that is certainly not a throwaway line. That is a serious, we're not overblowing this, because he is one of a handful of players who's actually matters enough to change the direction of your franchise overnight. He might be the single highest floor-raising player in the league. You get him, and your franchise changes overnight. Even if you're a good team, you go from good to great. So from Milwaukee's perspective, for them, this is about the next decade of Bucks basketball, because once you move him, you are starting over from scratch, and it's been made harder by trying to keep him happy in the meantime. So they're really kind of in a bad spot. And what a Giannis trade would look like, the Bucks, when they entertain this move and make this move, the return has to be massive. It has to be historic. It has to include multiple unprotected first-round picks, hopefully high up in the lottery, at least the chance to, multiple pick swaps, hopefully a young player or two, somebody who might project to be an all-star down the road. And for the Bucks, this is not negotiable. You don't trade a player of his caliber for depth pieces. You don't trade a player of his caliber for late first-round picks or pick swaps 5 years from now. Because every team, you don't make it because what the offer is, well, it kind of seems fair. You trade a player of this caliber only if you are blown away, if you are almost, as much as you can be, guaranteed a path post-Giannis. Whatever deal they accept has to give them a jump start on the next stage of the franchise. And that's where the Knicks run into a very big problem. And it's one you really can't get away from. So let's get something out of the way. Knicks fans, you have been conditioned to believe you are one star away. My entire life, Knicks fans have always thought that they are it's the DNA of the fan base. And in fairness, for the first time in a very long time, it's realistic. The energy has been justified. Jalen Brunson, legitimate star player. The culture change with the Knicks is absolutely real. So that's all well and good. They might just be one superstar away. But that does not automatically mean you still have the assets to get that superstar. Here is the truth, Knicks fans. You are asset poor now. You spent last year going all in. You've already went all in. Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns. And I understand the rationale. Maximize Brunson's window. Push your chips into the middle of the table. They did that last year, but in doing so, Leon Rose emptied the cupboard. The Knicks do not have the kind of picks you need to make for a trade of this magnitude. They do not have young blue chip prospects you need for this kind of trade. And the players they do have, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, Mitchell Robinson, those players are valuable, but they're not the centerpiece assets in a trade for Giannis. You know that. So let me repeat something very clearly. OG Anunoby is not a centerpiece player for Giannis. Mikal Bridges is not. Karl Anthony Towns, as much as Knicks fans would like to try to make him, is not. Josh Hart is not. These are great complementary pieces, and they help you win. And who knows, maybe the Knicks get to the NBA Finals with these players this year, but they are now players. The Bucks are trading Giannis because they can't win now with him. So you think they're better off with OG and Cat? Not even Nico Harrison would make that kind of trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Milwaukee is not looking to get older. They're not looking to stay in neutral. They are not looking to swap their superstar for your supporting cast. Again, not NBA 2K. What does Milwaukee want? They want picks. They want youth. They want upside. They are looking, when they make this deal, they are looking to the future. And the Knicks do not have enough of any of those things. It's not even close. They did have that at one time, but they burned those assets in the trades they made last year. Now, the Knicks could still make an offer. They could put something on the table, something like some combination of OG, Mikal Bridges, maybe Karl Anthony Towns. You have to figure out the salaries, of course. That's also a part of it. I don't know, Deuce McBride, Mitchell Robinson, a couple of, I think they only have one pick that they can actually trade, but let's say they have two picks way down the road, some pick swaps, a whole bunch of second rounders. But that package, which by the way, completely annihilates the Knicks roster. right? Like you're still in win now mode, especially when you get Giannis. And that's very much old Nick way thinking. That's still not enough for Milwaukee. Not when other teams could offer legitimate ceiling-changing assets that give you hope now and hopefully production later. The Knicks would essentially be offering good players and mediocre players, and that's simply not a Giannis offer. And again, if you're Milwaukee, why would you want that? How does this make your franchise stronger in the long run? Because OG, what is he, 28 years old? How does he help you rebuild when he's hurt all the time? Karl Anthony Towns on that massive contract, how does that reset your timeline? These players are helpful in the now. The Bucks are saying, we can't win now. We have to look to the future. So from that asset standpoint, the Knicks are simply, I don't see how they can be in the game. They were in the game a year ago before the Bridges trade. Certainly when you trade 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges, maybe they wouldn't even be in then. And certainly before the Towns trade, but they figured at that time we were one move away. So now they're not in on it. That's the thing about assets. You can only trade them once, and the Bucks better know that this time. And there's another part of this that has to be said out loud, something Knicks fans, I guess, are probably not going to want to hear. Giannis is not a free agent. Like the fact that this article is about him wanting the Knicks, he does not have a no trade clause. He's not a free agent. The Bucks do not owe him a say in where he goes. Maybe if all the trades are equal, maybe they'll give him a say. But his contract situation gives him a little bit of influence because where he'd be willing to sign an extension. So, and I'm sure that teams would want his buy-in before trading for him. But the Bucks' objective is not to send him where he wants to go. Their objective is to get the strongest return possible. That's the only thing that would matter. And the Knicks simply cannot provide that return. This is one of those moments where emotion and reality diverge. I get that the Knicks are playing great basketball, but when you sit down at the negotiating table, none of that matters. What matters is assets, and the Knicks simply do not have the pile of assets that they would need. It's just that simple. So why the Knicks, another part of this that I want to hit on, why would the Knicks need to make this trade? And it seems like Knicks fans have glossed over this. If you want Giannis, right, we'd have to agree you have to blow up the roster. There's no scenario where you're able to add him to the core that you currently have. Every single player not named Jalen Brunson, I'm not saying you're going to trade all of them, but they'd have to be available. So, and I'm not saying that because I think the roster's bad. I'm saying that because this is simply how math works. And here's where it gets awkward for the Knicks. This is the same roster the organization told you last year was good enough to reach the NBA Finals. We can't get away from that. That was the message when the Knicks got eliminated last year by the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals. The problem was not roster construction. It was not talent. It was not the ceiling of this group. The problem was the coach. And they went out and got a coach. And they took a while to find, anybody could do a better job. And this is exact group. When that happened, we said we have to get to the finals. So if that's true, why do you need Giannis? Why do you need to detonate everything to be able to add a genuine superstar player? If you genuinely believe that this roster was finals ready, then you should want to see it fully realized, right? I mean, why? It would be one thing if the Knicks still had a ton of assets and they could simply raise the ceiling. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say the roster was a coaching change away from being a championship run or at least a finals appearance and then say, well, we got to tear it all down to acquire Giannis. Those two ideas completely contradict each other. And that's kind of the uncomfortable part for the Knicks and specifically Leon Rose. Because the real reason you would need to make this kind of move and blow up the roster, and even when Giannis really isn't a realistic target, is because the roster is not good enough. It wasn't good enough last year, and while it is a good roster, it was not good enough last year. And I don't know that it's going to be good enough this year. Not when Karl Anthony Towns is your second most reliable player. We've seen the warts. And Leon Rose should have known this. He's supposed to be the plugged-in insider that should have known that Giannis was going to become available a year from now, and that doesn't seem to be the case because it seemed pretty obvious. The other bigger reality is that the NBA is driven by superstar mobility. That mobility is different, I think, than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Teams now, the three things they want, picks, picks, and picks. So once you remove picks from the equation, yes, they probably like a balance of picks and some young talent. They don't want to, I'm sure, bottom out. And maybe pick swaps is a way you can kind of sweeten the pot. But the draft picks, especially lottery picks, unprotected lottery picks, That is the currency. That's what wins trades, not good established players. They help you win games in the now, but they don't help you rebuild, and they don't help you in the future. And that's where the Bucks have to look, is the future. The Knicks don't operate in that space anymore because they chose a different path. They chose the path of push the chips in now. And that could still work. I mean, there's no super team in the Eastern Conference this year. But if they want to go chase a superstar now, they lost their opportunity. That was the cost of the Bridges trade. That was the cost of going out and getting Karl Anthony Towns. You cashed in your chips for those players. Those players are yours now. And it means that the Giannis dream is kind of that. It's just kind of a pipe dream for Knicks fans. And you can talk about it. You can be excited about it. But I don't think it's realistic. So there's the part that everyone wants to skip ahead to. But Gordon, Giannis wants the Knicks. He wants the Knicks. He said so. He wants to go to New York. Okay. Is this free agency? I don't think it's free agency. Free agency this is not college football where we put the free agency in the middle. Is his contract up? Does he have a no trade clause that can specifically point to one organization and only one organization? Can he dictate where he wants to be traded? Not really. Now he can have does his preference matter at all? Yeah, probably, but only a little bit. If the deals are equal, well then maybe Milwaukee might want to do the right thing by a guy who got them a championship. But Giannis can want the Knicks all he wants. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure he would love to play in New York after living in Milwaukee. Love to be in this market with the marketing opportunities and all that. But unless you can sign him outright, his interest really doesn't matter. Milwaukee's priority should not be make Giannis happy. The priority should be maximize the return. The Bucks are not in the business of doing what is convenient for the Knicks. If anything, it feels like the Knicks are going to get screwed even when there is a good trade to be there. The Bucks got to look at their franchise for really the next decade. This trade will dictate how they play for the next decade. So Giannis might be intrigued with New York. He might be intrigued with Jalen Brunson and the marketing upside, as I said. But none of that puts assets in the Knicks draft cabinet. The Knicks generally have to overpay wildly to get what they want. That's what they did with Bridges. And if you're the Bucks, you have one priority: extract the biggest, most future-shaping haul possible. That is the job. That is job 1, 2, and 3. That is your only responsibility. And here, I think, is the most important part. Milwaukee is not desperate, or at least they shouldn't be. We'll see what happens as this thing kind of plays out. They don't need to trade him. They can sit. They can wait. They can offer him the supermax. They can operate on their timeline, not his. They do not have to blink. They should have been more proactive in the offseason looking at this, and I guess they were when they had conversations with the Knicks. But if they choose to move him before the trade deadline this year, it's because they believe they can't win with the current roster, which I think is fair, but they also believe that the return is simply too good to pass up. They have to look at the next era now, and how do we plot out what assets are we getting that's going to allow us to land that next big-time player. And the Knicks will be one of 15 teams and will likely have the least appealing offer of any of them. Not because they aren't a good organization now. They do not have the assets anymore. It's simple as that. The Bucks are not. This is not simply pivoting. This is a full-on reset. Also, another part of this that people keep glossing over, when Windhorst said the offseason trade talks went nowhere, well, what has changed since then? The Knicks tried in the offseason. They put together an offer they thought was fair, but the Bucks didn't like what was offered. So why would they like it now? What has changed on the Knicks route? You're telling me there was something that the Knicks wouldn't offer then, but would offer now? Think about what the Knicks could have offered. Think about what their picks look like. And think about what their young players look like. They have now players. If you're Milwaukee, why would you accept a package that doesn't give you the flexibility to go young and rebuild on your timeline and to chart a new direction? Not simply just stand in they're not competing for titles and they're not competing for playoff spots. The Knicks simply don't have that kind of offer. And that's why the talks back then went nowhere. And they're probably going to go nowhere now. So let's entertain the fantasy scenario that Knicks fans will hit on. The only way this works is if Giannis demands specifically to play for the Knicks. That is the dream, right? He'll force his way to New York. The only way I'll sign an extension is with New York. And the Bucks have absolutely no choice. Oh, we're just going to have to trade him to New York. And I get why Knicks fans will say that. It is kind of comforting to think, well, he's just going to the amount of times I've heard somebody's going to force their way to New York. Let's walk through what this would actually look like. For this scenario to happen, Giannis would have to publicly, or at least privately and very forcibly, tell the Milwaukee Bucks, I will not sign an extension with any other team but the New York Knicks. He would have to put his foot down in a way that it doesn't seem realistic. He can't say I prefer New York. He can't say I could see myself in New York someday. No, this pipe dream, this fantasy requires the nuclear option. He must say, I want the Knicks or nothing. And I think that that's where the idea completely collapses, because if Giannis does that, if he backs the Bucks into a corner like that, everything about his perception publicly changes overnight. Giannis is one of the most universally beloved superstars currently playing in the NBA. He is that rare kind of player of a superstar who is very, very likable and very team-oriented, very organization-oriented. And he's built this reputation with the complete opposite of that behavior. So is Giannis really going to blow all that up and torch his identity just to force his way to New York? I have a very hard time believing that the Giannis that we've all kind of come to know publicly, and maybe he's not that way, maybe behind the scenes he's a different guy, but even if he did that, what does that leave him with? It kind of leaves him in limbo. Because if you're Milwaukee, again, you only get one swing at this thing. And they're not the kind of franchise, they're not getting free agent superstars going to Milwaukee. You can't punt on your franchise asset like other teams might be able to do. You're not going to land guys, the superstars. Nobody's dreaming about going to Milwaukee. So they can't just absorb a bad trade and survive. If the Bucks trade Giannis, that is a franchise-altering event. It is a reset button, and it impacts the next decade of their organization. So you cannot turn that into, well, we got Karl Anthony Towns, Deuce McBride, and we got a pick swap in 2020. I mean, guys, come back to me back here on planet Earth. They would be a laughingstock. And we just got to see how that turned out for another organization with the Dallas Mavericks and Nico Harrison not that long ago. The worst trade proposal on the board, that is organizational malpractice. And it is a very quick line to getting fired if you're in the Bucks front office. So if Giannis applies maximum pressure, the Bucks have a responsibility to the franchise that they can't just take scraps for this guy who, we've been talking about it forever. You have to squeeze as hard as you can for the best possible deal. We saw that certainly with Dame Lillard. He did not want to go to Milwaukee. He had put out, I think it was it Miami? The only place I want to go to Miami. I don't know that he's ever still been to Miami, well, maybe on a road trip. And the other part of this is the second that Giannis becomes available, how many teams do you think line up? A dozen? 15? Half the league? Teams almost certainly would have better trade packages than the Knicks. Teams with blue chip players. You've seen all the articles, Atlanta, the Lakers certainly could be in the mix. Unprotected picks, teams who have young stars who can headline a real deal. And the Knicks, after doing everything right for once, I think they probably jumped the gun last offseason when they made the trades for Bridges and Cat. And the Knicks now would have probably the least attractive package for a player like Giannis. So look, Knicks fans, I understand the excitement. You've been dreaming about this moment for years, but let's call it what it is. It is an absolute pipe dream. Now, look, weird things sometimes happen in the NBA, so I'm not going to write it off completely. But, when writers in the past, Knicks fans have talked about Knicks for clicks, right? Meaning that somebody wrote an article and they're just including the Knicks for engagement on social media. I'm not saying that that's what's happening here, but it kind of feels like the Knicks being in the center of the Giannis talk is very much a Knicks for clicks situation. I'm not disputing what has been reported. I'm sure he does probably want out. That would seem to make sense. And I'm not saying that he wouldn't prefer New York, considering he's played his entire career in Milwaukee. That part seems believable. But lots of players, I've heard through the years, lots of players would love to play in New York. And I'm sure all of them would prefer to play in New York than Milwaukee. But again, that's not how the NBA works. Preference is not leverage. Leverage is not a trade package. So if Giannis ever actually does hit the market, you're talking about a full-on feeding frenzy. As soon as that article hit, you're talking about a bidding war. You're talking about teams who can offer real assets. elite, young talent, multiple unprotected first, and legit corner stores. Teams that have waited for this kind of moment. The Knicks didn't wait for this kind of moment. They waited for a moment that has already happened with Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns. So they would be sitting at the back of the line. Okay, let's talk a little NFL and the conversation surrounding the NFL MVP. We get this conversation, it seems like every week from really like week 3 on, and it's constantly changing because each week in the NFL, things change. So as we now head into this week, we've got 3 games left beyond this week. This is week 14 of the season, so we still have week 15, 16, 17. And the conversation has focused on Drake Maye. The Patriots, obviously, number 1 seed in the AFC. Drake Maye has taken this giant leap forward this season thanks to Mike Vrabel and the moves that they've made in the offseason. And he certainly does look like a legitimate MVP candidate. But what does that mean? In the NFL, the people who vote for NFL MVP must be the laziest people in the world because it seems like every single year, the NFL MVP is going to go to a player who's the quarterback on whoever the best team is. Doesn't matter if the quarterback is the best quarterback in the league. I don't know that anybody would say that Drake Maye is by far the best quarterback in the NFL if you were talking about just things that happened this year, but he's had an unbelievable season. The stats kind of line up. But a couple of things. A, can we wait until we get to the end of the season before we know who the NFL... Each and every week, crazy things happen. Just take a look at last week, the Panthers upsetting the Rams. And it seems this year, the NFL is as wide open as it's ever been. Maybe because the Chiefs look like they're going to be on the outside looking in. And if you had to pick a team in the AFC right now, maybe that team would be the Patriots. But take a look at who the Patriots' schedule to get to 10-2 is not exactly... Their wins this year, I have them written down. Dolphins, Panthers, Bills, good win. Saints, Titans, Browns, Falcons, Jets, Bengals, and Giants. Those are the top 10 teams in the NFL draft. Now, I mean, they're not good against anybody. And for the Patriots, you only can win the games that you're on the schedule. So by all means, that's great. But I would not look at this year, right now, and be crowning it. And we do this every single week. Next week, all these shows will be having the same conversation. Who's the NFL MVP? Who cares? We don't award the NFL MVP in week 14. And it's not the kind of year where there's a clear-cut guy. Even as great as Drake Maye has been, he's in the conversation. And maybe he's the betting favorite right now because people are aware enough to say, hey, you know what the voters for NFL MVP do? They vote for whoever is the quarterback of the best team. Can never be a running back, can never be a player of any other position. It's got to be a quarterback, and they have to have the best record. It is the laziest argument that you can make without looking at anything really else, and it happens every single year. So, I don't know, maybe I'll be proven wrong. The Patriots will continue to win games, and they'll be the number 1 seed, and of course, the playoffs don't matter, so it's just about a regular season award. So maybe Drake Maye will turn out to be the NFL MVP, but that's not been decided as of yet. And it's really lazy to just simply say, well, the Patriots went, 14-3, got to give it to Drake Maye. There's lots of candidates who should be considered, and we go through this every single week. Earlier this year, people were talking about Daniel Jones. Remember that conversation? Sam Darnold. Daniel Jones and the Colts will be lucky to make the playoffs given their schedule the rest of the way. So maybe Drake Maye will turn out to be the NFL MVP, but he's certainly not the NFL MVP right now.
Remember college? Well, now, college is over, and here comes your student loan debt. Is your private student loan debt keeping you up at night? You really need to talk to YRefi. YRefi refinances distressed or defaulted private student loans that others won't touch. They can save you thousands of dollars and get you a custom payment that you can afford. And they don't care what your credit score is. Don't let private student loan debt ruin your life. Call YRefi today.
Okay, maybe you don't follow NASCAR. I do not follow NASCAR. And maybe you only see it when there's a great crash that shows up on SportsCenter or it goes viral on your Twitter feed. But right now, something is happening in the world of stock car racing that is not only going to change NASCAR, but also could impact how American sports leagues beyond NASCAR operate. It's a massive antitrust trial. Kind of like think back in the day, NFL, USFL, or more recently, the PGA Tour with the Live Golf and all that. And it's kind of fascinating. It's got everything that you would want in a big-time trial, billionaires and breakaway league talk and all that type of stuff. So I'm going to try to break this down for the normal sports fan to show you why you should care. So what this case is about, there's two NASCAR teams, the one that is co-owned by Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin, and another one called Front Row Motorsports. And they are suing NASCAR because they say NASCAR operates like a monopoly. And it has forced teams into a business model where not only does NASCAR set all the rules, but they control all the money. The teams almost have no leverage in any kind of situation, and that the system is so financially tight for the teams that losing even one sponsor can put a team completely out of business. It's that tight. So in court, NASCAR's president, who is a guy by the name of Steve O'Donnell, was asked about this, and he basically did not dispute that NASCAR is a monopoly. He was asked directly about it. And to me, I'm not a lawyer, but that seems like a pretty wild statement, given that that's what the trial is about. Yeah, we are kind of a monopoly. So how this started was back in 2022, NASCAR's teams met with executives and said, look, the business model is kind of broken. It's not working. And at the same time, other sports were dealing with breakaway leagues, especially in sports where you're talking about individuals, not teams. And most famously at that time, it was the live golf stuff and breaking away from the PGA Tour. And inside NASCAR headquarters, rightfully so, they were a little worried and they were asking the right question. What if our teams do that? What if they create their own series with some other big financial backer? Even maybe foreign investing, right? The Saudis have done that in other places and certainly would seem like a reasonable thing to ask if you're a NASCAR executive. So NASCAR did something to protect itself. It basically made agreements with all the major racetracks, contracts that said no other stock car series can race here. So think about it like the NBA, signing exclusive agreements with arenas, MSG, all the different arenas. No other basketball league can play here. So it really kind of gets down to the charter system. NASCAR's version of franchises, NASCAR teams don't own franchises the way that the NFL or the NBA does or baseball. Instead, they have what's called charters. They have licenses that agree entry into races and a percentage or a share of the revenue. Teams argue that NASCAR's latest offer was basically like a gun to their head, take it or leave it. And if they refused, they'd be stuck racing as what's called open teams, which obviously get way less money and they have absolutely no guarantees. So one lawyer called that option basically financially unsustainable. And NASCAR quickly came back with, well, if you don't like the charters, go race as an open team. So that kind of shows you the gun to the head. Like that's like telling an NBA team, well, if you don't like our revenue split, just go play in the G League. Just go play with the Harlem Globetrotters or something. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So the tension, NASCAR says that teams did have options. The teams say that NASCAR, they were holding a gun. And front row owner Bob Jenkins was on the stand and basically said, we didn't have any other options. NASCAR controls the entire sport from top to bottom. Now, NASCAR's lawyers countered with, well, you've certainly given people take it or leave it offers, right? You've given people deadlines before. And the example that was used was that apparently they told Denny Hamlin he had until a Friday at 5 p.m. to decide on a merger. And Jenkins responded with, well, that's not really the same. He did have options. We didn't have options. And that term options is really critical, I think, to this entire case. It basically hinges on what you think that word means, options. So why should this matter to the average sports fan, maybe you're saying? Well, this could reshape how American sports leagues distribute power. So if the teams win, if they are able to plead their case and win, NASCAR not only could be forced to share more revenue, that doesn't really appeal, I think, to most sports fans. The money in these leagues now is just ridiculous. But it could open doors absolutely for a breakaway league. If NASCAR is ruled as a monopoly, abusing its power, suddenly the idea of a rival stock car league backed by big investors, maybe even foreign ones, I mean, that would seem to be the most likely place, that becomes way more realistic. So think Live Golf 2.0, but with cars. And like you might think, well, Live has kind of been a failure. Yes, but these investors, they're learning from these examples. Eventually, at some point, these things are going to work. And if the team owners can show across all sports, it shows that these teams are starting to push back. We've seen this in other sports, college football realignment, baseball with the minor league antitrust exemption. And I think that this is all part of a trend with as much money as involved that owners and athletes are refusing to accept things the way they were. And look, the reason why I saw this is because Michael Jordan's involved. So the fact that Michael Jordan is involved in a court case immediately jumps up a little bit more than it ordinarily would. So the trial is still going on, But the first wave of testimony so far, I don't know that it looks great for NASCAR. They knew that the teams were going to be unhappy and they were worried that they were going to bolt. So they locked in the racetracks and the exclusivity with those racetrack clauses to prevent competition. And I don't know, that seems like the definition of being a monopoly, right? NASCAR says it was simply protecting its business. They weren't trying to ruin alternatives, but that's basically what they did. Now, multiple executives, Jeff Gordon being one of the big names, indicated early on that the new revenue models were needed for the sport. I don't know about the nitty-gritty of that. But when the push came to shove, NASCAR's top boss, Jim France, he was not open to changes. So the contradiction is going to be a huge factor for the jury. And look, this is a fascinating case. There's going to be ramifications for other leagues as well. And I think the reason why you should care is this is not just about who gets how much money from a race. It's about the big stuff. It's about control. It's about power. It's about partnership between leagues and players, or however you want to break it down. And if the teams win, NASCAR is not just going to be forced to share more revenue. That charter system is going to have to get rebuilt. And the breakaway leagues absolutely could be a possibility. And I just think about this kind of stuff when it comes to the baseball labor talks that are going to come up in 2027. And in terms of NASCAR, the France family's power, their absolute control, is absolutely being challenged. So look, if NASCAR wins, it's more of the same, right? Their power will be completely cemented, and teams will just kind of have to accept the current financial realities. And I guess teams will risk folding or consolidating. I guess that becomes more real. But it's fascinating that the judge in the trial is quoted as saying, everybody's going to get hurt. That sounds like something from an episode of Succession. Everybody's going to get hurt this way. In the process, though, it's going to be fascinating to watch. And it does kind of tell you how things operate in the modern sports economy, that there is this pushback. And the gatekeepers are gone, right? Like these athletes, these players, these drivers in this case, they're not just willing to accept anymore. This is just the way things are. There's going to be pushback. And I get the feeling this is not going to be the last trial of this kind. All right, that's going to do it for another episode of Gordon Damer on Sports. If you've not done it already, hit that subscribe button. Really does help out the podcast, especially on YouTube. We need to get our subscribers up there, so please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with a fresh edition of Gordon Damer on Sports.